Glasgow was not really known as a Georgian city, but it started off that way. Certainly when they built the houses up to Blythewood Square, the buildings were all very classical. It was laid out on a grid plan, and then the elevations were classical, so the windows repeated quite a lot. But this eventually gave way to the tenement.
Glasgow began as a medieval city, but as trade links grew, so did the city. For a time it was a Georgian city. The Georgians liked to bring order to the urban layout, which is why we have a grid city, but also to order the elevations. Classicism was in fashion. In Glasgow, most of the terraces up to Blythewood Square were classical, built around 1820. These were originally large individual houses, since converted to commercial use. But the Victorians followed the money. The feuing system gave rise to the tenement, where few duties would increase with density. Tenements, initially built in a classical form, were becoming the norm. These tenements in Bridgeton were basically classical, same-size windows in a repeating pattern. Single-spaced windows gave way to twinned windows with slender mullions. Then came triple window groups. Developers liked to appeal to the middle classes and artisans. Twinned living room windows gave way to bay windows, which gave a much better light with views up and down the street. Pollokshields East started around 1850. It had lots of three-storey bay windows. Bays were very popular in Glasgow, particularly on the south side and in Mount Florida. More expensive tenements often had large corner bays. This is a four-storey tenement on Saltoun Street, famous as a painting by the artist Avril Petten. It was a wonderful circular bay window which floods the rooms with light. The area of windows and the height of the ceilings was set in the building bylaws. With ever-increasing demand on housing, oriels became popular as they allowed the tenements to be built to the pavement line without a front garden. They also facilitated shop units at the ground level. But there have been problems with bays and oriels. This one in Albert Road in Glasgow, where the bay and much of the front wall has collapsed. Why? You can see the ends of the exposed joists are rotten. This happens because tenement floor joists were built into the outer stone wall. If that wall gets wet over time, then rot can start in any embedded timber. Inside, across the bay, there is usually a large timber bressumer which ties the outer leaf into the wall. This too can become rotten. Bay and oriel walls are much thinner than the main tenement wall, which makes them more vulnerable. If you can see a crack in the lintel near the lintel joint, it is likely that the metal has corroded. As rust expands, it cracks the stone. Here you can see that original crack. In order to tie the lintel stonework together, metal clamps were used to secure the external corners. They sometimes use bronze clamps, which are meant to be rustproof, but iron was mostly used in Glasgow tenements. The usual solution is to remove the corroded metal and replace it with a stainless steel clamp or tie. Water can get into the stone if the line pointing has fallen away or if the stone has decayed. Repointing has to be done very carefully to ensure the stone beds are fully filled. Sometimes it is best to do this from the inside, although it will also damage any wall linings. Oriels were tied back into the tenement with a large 2-inch thick cast iron plate. Sometimes these can be seen underneath the oriel. If they corrode, they can damage any adjacent stonework. Gourlay's lecture notes to students shows this design clearly. Sometimes the cast iron plate is embedded in the wall structure. Again, corrosion will damage the surrounding stone. The embedded cast iron plate and the timber bressumer are shown in this diagram. Where the joists have become rotten, the oriel stonework ceases to be tied in and failure occurs. These are some recent examples of oriel problems. Often insurance or the lack of insurance will fail to provide enough funds for reinstatement. When shops were built, the main outer wall was supported on cast iron, steel or wood beams, carried on cast iron and steel standards. In this shop front, the projecting cornice was tied back to the floor joists which passed through the wall. The rest of the outer wall collapsed because the chimney flues were poorly tied in. In this oriel, large cast iron corbel brackets have been added to a later date to support the iron plate of the oriel and allow the insertion of steel beams underneath. This is typical of many tenement shop fronts. Even this early Pollokshields tenement, sadly destroyed by fire, had cast iron beams and standards supporting the upper wall and cornice, although by 1890s steel beams were in common use.